Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us tonight for tips and ideas for using Google Sheets to improve your workflow. We're happy that you're joining us today. We're going to be starting our evening today with our land acknowledgement. We begin this session by acknowledging that we are all gathered on land that has been inhabited by many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. GEG leaders for this school year include GEGs are independently run communities of educators who inspire and empower each other to meet the needs of students through technology, both in the classroom and beyond.
And the GEG leaders for this year are listed here. We're just so excited to have a cross-section of teachers and leaders from across the province from all different contexts. We definitely invite you to think about joining next year's team. And tonight for this session, we have myself, Jennifer Cassatod. I'm a teacher librarian in Aurora, Canada. I'll let the ladies introduce themselves.
Yeah, and I'm Isabella Liu. I'm joining in Toronto. I work at an independent school.
Good evening, everyone, again. And I am Iniyal in Paraja, and I'm an educator in the TDSB. And I am very excited to be here today with all of you.
Wonderful. So in order to connect with us this evening, please sign in using a YouTube account or a Gmail account and use the chat to either contribute ideas or ask questions. If you're on Twitter, our hashtag is GEG Ontario. We will be checking the hashtag to see if there are any questions from Twitter. If you are not watching us live and you have any questions that you would like to direct to us, you may also use the Twitter hashtag. We also have a Google Group mailing list. Details are there, as well as an Instagram account. And our website is where you can find all of our past webinars, as well as this one and the resources. And you can find that at GEG Ont site, all capitals.
Alrighty, thank you so much. And then we'll get started with our Google Sheets webinar. So thank you so much. Hi, we have a fellow teacher that is also joining in from YCDSB. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining in with us on a Wednesday, on a school night at 8 p.m. It really just goes to show how much you care about your students and wanting to learn more to upgrade yourself and bring in those skills into the classroom. So before we start, let me just introduce myself again. I am Isabella Liu. I work at an independent school. I'm a high school math and science teacher, so I teach chemistry in a senior level. I'm also the EdTech integration program coordinator at our school. You can find me at Twitter as well as Instagram, where you can find all these different teaching resources that I'm designing. So looking forward to connecting with you there.
I'm Iniyal in Paraja again. I've been an educator for about 20 years, I think. During that time, I've done a variety of different assignments from middle school, science, STEM, ESL, special education. And currently, I have the privilege of working with a larger group of students, teachers, and community as a vice principal within the TDSB.
So today's session, we're going to try and get down to the nitty-gritty stuff of Google Sheets. So we're just going to try and get us familiarizing ourselves to the basic features of Google Sheets. Hopefully we can organize some data by sorting them into different criteria, and then also reflecting upon in terms of the type of data that we're trying to collect, and how are we going to use these data to inform our decisions as teachers, and to hopefully lead to a further future session where we can start analyzing data and getting into the different types of formulas, as well as pivot tables that we can design in our Google Sheets. So stay tuned for our future session there. As I've mentioned before, I will be going through the presentation now, and then Ini is just going to keep track of the comments, and she'll try to answer any questions that you might have. So if you have any questions, just make sure you put it in the chat box there, and we'll get started. So before we start, we just wanted to make sure just to do a little bit of a temperature check. This is something that I like to do a lot in the beginning of my class, just to see where my students are coming from and how they're feeling, so that I can potentially shift the way the lesson is progressing. And so if you can just head on over to that link, bit.ly/GEG sheet. It's case sensitive, so everything is lowercase, and just very quickly answer the question there. And I'll show you how the results look like. So as you can see, the Google form, if you click on that link, it's essentially a Google form, and it's anonymous Google form. So it allows students to be a lot more comfortable when it comes to letting the teachers know how they're feeling. And it's really quick and easy, where it's just a picture, and then the students just have to select a particular image that best represents how they feel, and then if there's anything additional that they want the teachers to be aware of. So for example, I have students, they would preemptively tell me like, oh, like there's construction workers are coming into my home today. It's going to be very disruptive, so you might see me logging off, and it's because I need to shift where I'm teaching. So those are some of the important things that would be quite good to know as a teacher beforehand. And if I could just show you as you're filling in, I know that people are putting it into the chat where you can find that link. So with Google Forms, what you can do to it is to view your results in a Google Sheet. So I'm just going to show you how this Google Sheet looks like, and I'm going to zoom out. Yeah, so as you can see, this Google Sheet, we have already pre-validated the data. And what this is doing for us is that we can have an overview of how everybody's feeling in terms of color. So if certain students are red, then potentially that's something that you could sort of be mindful of, and also address that as a class. If a majority of the students are feeling quite great, everything is green, then you can progress your lesson accordingly. So data validation is often something that we use frequently as teachers with Google Sheets, and this is something that you're going to be learning today. So I really love this. Alrighty. To get started, we just need to learn a little bit of jargon on what Google Sheets essentially is. So a lot of us are very familiar with the Microsoft Suite. Essentially, it is just like the Excel software. However, with Google Sheets and with your Google credentials, it basically allows you to work on this on a cloud, which is like you can work on it live online, and it allows you to connect with other people and collaborate with other people on the same spreadsheet. I know that Excel didn't allow itself to do that unless you have the Office 360, but Google Sheets essentially is a really cheap and easy way for you to design a spreadsheet and collaborate with others. So in terms of the Sheets vocabulary, if we're talking about a small rectangle that I see here in the red part, we just call it a cell. A cell is a particular area where data can be entered. Columns are usually denoted as alphabet, as you can see on the top. So we have our A, B, C, D on the very top. And then we also have our rows that are denoted as numbers on the vertical column on the left-hand side of your Google Sheets. So we have our cell, we have our column, and then we have our rows. Then we can also call it as a cell name. So the way we can do that, for example, in this particular cell that I'm highlighting here, it is actually in column C, row 4. So then that particular cell name is going to be called C4. So that's that is really helpful for us to find our data, and also to just sort of, this is really important when it comes to data validation, because we want to select a particular range where we're going to be manipulating our data. So in terms of in terms of organizing your Google Sheets, there are two major things. So when you're copying data here, especially when it comes to text, there are two different ways that you can express that text. Most of the time when you're copying, automatically truncated, and that's because it automatically clips your text. Now, if you want to showcase the entire text, you can simply double click it on the very top in your column, and that will push all your text, flush it out to however long the text is. So if your students are writing a lot of like things, or if your staff members are giving you a lot of feedback that's like a paragraph long, you probably wouldn't want to have that particular option, because you wouldn't be able to scroll until the very end of the sentence. What you could do is to wrap the particular text. And the way you're going to do that is simply go to Format, Text Wrapping, and instead of saying overflow, you're going to select wrap. And what it's going to do, it's going to limit the column at its particular length. You can obviously change the column length however you want, but then it will showcase the entire text in that particular cell. So it will make sure that every single word in that cell is displayed to you. Now that you have all your data together, you realize that there are certain headings that could really, that spans across multiple columns. And so this is when merging comes to play. So merging, again, basically what it does is that it allows you to combine multiple cells. It doesn't matter whether it's vertical or rows. You can actually select however many cells that you want to combine into one large cell. So the first thing you need to do is highlight the cells. So over here, I've highlighted a 2x3 area of cells, and then I've simply selected at this icon here. It looks like a little box with two arrows pointing inward, and then click on the downward arrow here. And you're going to just select merge horizontally or merge vertically, or you can just simply select merge all, and it will combine everything for you and create this one large cell. So I love this because I tend to create a lot of my lab handouts using Google Sheets, where students are basically typing in their data into the Google Sheets. So it's really important for me to sort of remove any sort of unnecessary cells by using the merge function. So yeah, it's a really important thing, and I find myself constantly using that all the time. Next up we have is auto-filling columns. So auto-filling columns basically allows you to, instead of typing out every single value over and over again, Google Sheets is smart enough to figure out what you're trying to do here. So as you can see here, I've typed in class number or the class code, so 5/6A, and then I have student 1, 2, and 3. 3 cells is usually what's indicative for Google Sheets to determine what your pattern is. And then all you have to do is just drag. So highlight this particular cell and then drag it down. If you were to drag down one particular cell, as you can see, it will just duplicate the entire cell for the column. And if you created 3 different cells in consecutive order, for example, 1, 2, and 3, you highlight those 3 cells and then drag it down. Google Sheets is smart enough to figure out, oh, hey, you might want to increase the next cell by a number by step 1. So then it will fill the cell by adding 1 extra digit after that particular number. So this will save you so much time when it comes to just populating a student attendance sheet or any sort of grouping or grade book, because you don't really need to then type in every single course code manually, every single cell, because Google Sheet will do it for you. All you have to do is copy in your course code once, and then just drag that cell down, and then it will do that for you. So auto-filling columns is a really neat trick that I also like to teach my students, because when they start designing their data sheets. And now we have our sorting function. So as you can see, we're slowly building up our Google Sheets. Now you have your headings that are all there. You have your data. You have managed to fill your sheets. So now you have actual data here. How are you going to start sorting it? Like, what does that mean? So we can actually sort our data in two different ways. It can either sort the data in ascending order, descending order, usually in the form of alphabetical or numerical order. So for example, in this column that I've highlighted, if I were to select sort, it will automatically know that it is by alphabetical order. And you can just change it accordingly depending on what you're trying to see. What I like to do this, it's also in terms of grades where I just sort and I do it from ascending order, so I can see what students are struggling potentially for particular types of assessments. Then I can reach out to them early to say that, hey, there's an extra help session here. Maybe you can tune in. So sorting is a really important skill, and it really helps sorting data if you have it all in a column rather than in a row. So sorting is most useful when you have your results in a column. So again, just to reiterate, in order for you to sort, all you have to do is go to the menu, and that's on the way at the top. Click Data, and you can actually sort the sheet by column A or whatever column that you choose. And there are these different options. So there are many different options for you to sort your data. So just make sure that you are sorting your results in a way that best suits you. Next up, we have splitting columns. Now, this is something that we often find ourselves in, where we have a student sheet and we're trying to copy it from like a CSV file or from a Word file into our Google Sheets. And then what happens is that all the data is combined into a single cell. So for example, over here, our student names are combined together. So their first name and last name are not divided into two separate columns. They're in fact into one single column. So what we could do is actually split text to columns. Again, same thing. We're going to go up to our data in our menu and then click on that and then select split text to columns, and then it will immediately split it for you wherever your spacing is. So as you can see in the cell, we have student space name. Google Sheet will help you split that text wherever that space is into a separate columns. And this saves you so much time, because I remember when I first started, I was just sort of like cutting, pasting, and then that would also like remove so much error on your side when you're using the split text to column function. Next up, and this is something that I've already mentioned, is conditional formatting, and we're sort of leading up to data validation as well. So conditional formatting essentially allows you to dynamically color code your Google Sheet, your spreadsheet, according to what sort of criterion that you want to put in. So for example, over here, I have a bunch of students and then their relative percentage for a particular assessment. And I can simply go to conditional formatting. And the way you're going to do that is simply highlight the entirety of your data and then right click. And then immediately there's a conditional formatting that's all the way at the bottom of that particular menu. When you click that, there's going to be a new box that shows up at the bottom right corner, and you can apply a single color if the cell has a certain value. So what I like to do is that, I only color it red if it is greater than 71. So I like to color it green if it is greater than 71. So as you can see here, if it is greater than 71, all the cells here are automatically marked green. Then you can add another conditional formatting rule where anything that's below a 71 and between another value, that's red. And then anything that's below 50, that's red. So then you can actually categorize students' assessment grades into colors. So then you can very easily tell how many students are doing well, or like how their achieving in this particular assessment, and then like what you could do in terms of next steps. Do you need to reassess particular concepts, or maybe you need to do a little, or you need to just reach out to a smaller group of students to do additional revision. So yeah, this is conditional formatting is a great way to easily color code your spreadsheet depending on what you have. And the way we have used it is mostly from gathering students' grades and then color coding it accordingly, and then this just for us teachers to find out more information. And then for our last bit, we are finally in our data validation section. So this is what you were seeing in our Google form check-in. Basically, what it does is that you can restrict certain values to, mostly what people do with data validation is that you can restrict the values that are entered into the cells, as well as warnings for invalid data. What we had done with our particular Google Sheet is that we drew from a particular criteria. So the 6 different pictures that you saw, we determined that as a particular criteria, and then we color coded it accordingly. So if you want to learn more about that, we are happy to explain and show you how we can do data validation in terms of what you want to do. Data validation is often the after step where you have to first collect the data and then organize that using the data validation tool. And it really allows you to have all your data at a glance, in addition to conditional formatting, that you can see that instead of just numbers and text. With the color coding, it really allows you to see holistically what is happening in your classroom. So to just continue on to data validation, there are various things that you can do in your spreadsheet. So first, you can have your list of items, so you can actually manually type this in. So for example, you have level 3, level 2, level 1, as well as R. And then you can so you can actually you can set your cell to be a drop-down menu. And in order for you to do that is to select data validation. Again, how you do that is go to your cell, right-click on that cell, and then at the very bottom of the pop-up window, there's data validation. When you click on it, you have this little box that is showing up that says data validation. So you can actually select criteria, list of items, where you type in the different grade levels that we have, and then you can actually show the drop-down list in the cell. So if you show that, then your cell becomes a drop-down menu. So then it allows you to, instead of typing in that this is a 3, this is a 2, that you can just simply drop down and click, drop down, click. So it's a lot easier for my colleagues to sort of determine where the students are in terms of a level instead of just typing it in manually. You now have set that entire column all have the same drop-down menu for level 3, 2, 1, and R. Then you can very easily to just click on the necessary levels that correspond to the student's achievement. So
Isabella, can I interrupt you?
Yeah, go ahead.
I wasn't sure if you could hear me. So if I can just add to what Isabella said, one of my favorite things that I use quite a bit is a lot of the features of data validation. For example, it's very pertinent right now with the report card season coming just around the corner. So one of the things that you could do with data validation is if you're doing learning skills and you're sharing learning skills or determining learning skills as a group of educators, so maybe with your CERT teacher or your ESL teacher, you can create a spreadsheet with all of your student names using the split column for the first name, last name, and then you could actually predetermine and put in the needs improve, the N and the S and the G and the E, and you can sort of just select from a predetermined scale, let's say. Another one of the favorite things I like doing is the checkboxes with data validation. So if you're assigning tasks for a group of students, let's say even like a little checklist at the end of their assignment. Or if it's with educators, you're creating a criteria. The checkboxes is a great one as well. We have used that when we are doing class organization in June as well, when teachers are collaborating on sheets, using some of the data validation points. So what kind of supports are students getting? Teachers can just use the chevron to choose from a series of drop-down. Are they an ESL student? Do they have an IEP? Do they get CERT support? Right? So you kind of predetermine and curate the limits, and then that makes it easier for a group of teachers or a group of students to choose that.
Yeah, what I really love about the checkbox ability with data validation is that I can then create study sheets for my students as well. That really based it off of the success criteria for a particular assessment. So instead of just sort of giving them a Google Doc with the bullet points, with the Google Sheets, students can actually track where they are in terms of their revision progress. So data validation is a very important tool, and thank you for sharing how you're using it in your staff, Ini. And let's see. Alrighty. So yeah, so this is basically what we were talking about in terms of inserting checkbox, and this is really straightforward. Same thing. Again, you can very easily access this menu by right-clicking the cell, or you can simply just go into insert checkbox because I think Google Sheets have realized that most of us are using it for our checkboxes. So this is really helpful. And all you can see here, immediately it's populating all the columns with checkboxes. And again, this is a really good way. I use it for my attendance, just for my own data collection, because I can just very easily just check as I go through it instead of writing down students' names.
And even if you do just one checkbox, then you highlight that box and drag it all the way down. It repeats the same function over and over again. So again, it's that workflow efficiency. One tool leads to another.
Exactly. And it's all about streamlining your work as well. So like you don't have to repeat it, like repeatedly typing the same thing over and over again. Google Sheets is smart enough to figure out what you're trying to do. And when you're dragging a particular cell, it will automatically populate that particular column for you. And you can do that horizontally as well. If you want the checkboxes to fill up the entire row, all you have to do is just highlight it and just drag from left to right. Yeah. And then obviously with our data, sometimes we also want to make sure that no one, like when we're sending this particular Google Sheet to other collaborators and colleagues, we don't want them to change up our like headings or locations of particular cells. So this is what we could do in terms of freezing columns. So freezing columns and rows basically allows you to read the entire database without having to remove yourself from the heading. So this is really helpful for me because I can essentially freeze my students' names, the columns that contain their names, and I can actually scroll across my spreadsheet to see that corresponds to specific assessments. So like, you know, when you're populating your gradebook, there's going to be a lot of different assessments, whether it is formative or summative, and you don't want to lose that first name, last name column because you don't want to be scrolling back and forth on your spreadsheet. So freezing the column has really helped me in terms of browsing my gradebook. Ini, would you like to just
add on to that as well?
Yeah.
Yes, we talked about freezing the columns, but you could also freeze the rows at the top. So you essentially create sort of a vertical and a horizontal frozen box, and then you can move up and down, left and right. Because I always forget halfway down, I forget what my column title was. So freezing really helps. And the only trick here is sometimes when you merge certain cells, it doesn't allow them to be frozen. So you kind of have to be aware of what cells you're merging. It may interfere with freezing that row or that column. But generally, it's a good way to get move up and down without losing the titles.
Yeah. And also in addition to freezing, you can also have the option of hiding. So, I get really overwhelmed sometimes when I'm presented with a spreadsheet of like a bunch of data that not necessarily pertain to me. So what's really helpful is that before you share it, you can actually just highlight particular columns or highlight particular rows and then just hide that. And in addition to that, when you start getting really familiar with Google Sheets, you can actually have multiple tabs that have multiple sheets in the same document, and you can actually hide that sheet. So when you share that with other people, they are not going to be able to see that unless they have editing rights and they can unhide that particular data. So this is really helpful because it really helps people to focus on the important stuff that you want people to look at and analyze. So yeah, hiding column and row is definitely something that I do all the time. And finally, protecting range. So this is kind of like sending people a view only Google Doc where you're giving your Google Sheets with a protected range. And what that means is that people will not be able to have access or change any sort of data if the cell is in the protected range. And this is really helpful because, for example, in our experiments, most of the time our students have to use a constant. And if that constant gets changed by like a decimal place, then all of their calculations are going to be wrong. So I like to protect particular cells in my experiment data sheets before I send it to the students. So regardless of what kind of changes they make to that sheet, the crucial information is not being changed because they're being protected, and they can always go back to those values. And yeah, so I don't know if Ini wants to talk more about how you're using protect range in your setting.
So one of the things that for students, as when I was a science teacher, having that, working on data in terms of a collaborative data collection and being able to have different groups collect data, share data in order to even gauge range, being able to do averages, doing sort of statistical work as well. But you don't want the groups to change each other's data. So you can protect it that way. But as an administrator, I find just working with teachers, whether it be in your subject groups or in your grade groups, when you are working on school goals and analyzing your own reading data or assessment data, protecting it with only having certain teachers have access to it, again, so that the data cannot be changed, or only certain individuals have the permission to change that data. We used it quite a bit actually during class organization at the end of the year when educators come together and create your class list. So to be able to not have different people, sometimes accidentally, but go in and change it, you want to contain that integrity. So it has a little visual sign as well. It has a little lock that shows up, indicating that it is protected and it's locked.
And finally, this is basically very much in line with our sorting, but with the filtering function, this allows us to hide data that we want to temporarily take out of view. So what we are going to be doing is simply filter, and the filter button like icon just looks like a little funnel. When you click that, it will allow you to create a custom filter that allows you to sort of set particular data to not be visible to certain people. And obviously this filter can be changed because, as you can see, if you select the filter, you can apply none, or you can apply your filter's name, which is filter 1, but you can obviously rename that accordingly. And I've mentioned this before, as you're getting more and more familiar with Google Sheets, you realize that you have the ability to create multiple tabs into one single document. I like doing this because I can have all my students' groups onto a single spreadsheet, so I can actually see where what the students are doing on that Google Sheet and if they're making progress. And you can actually color code these sheets by simply clicking the downward button and then just changing it up. And you can also drag, so you can actually select this particular sheet and then drag it all the way to the right by changing the order. You can also protect the sheet if you don't want, if that's your answer key and you don't want the students to change the answers there. So the tabs allows me to sort of have all my students onto the same spreadsheet without having to create separate spreadsheets for my students. And Ini, do you want to?
No, you covered all my favorites. My favorite is the color coding. Just like I color code all my folders, it's very visual. So I like that aspect of visual to sort of a very numeric and analytical task.
Yeah, exactly. And I love it because I also love just color coding and see like, oh, green, all the students are done. So I don't need to go back and revisit this particular tab. If it's red, then that means I have to like keep an eye out for my students. And then, the orange, I could just sort of touch base with them like at the end of the lesson kind of thing. Yeah. So color coding is really, it's really great for us to all see everything holistically. And finally, we're getting into formula. So again, essentially, spreadsheet, Google Sheets is an Excel file, which is essentially a spreadsheet, which originally was created for us to complete mathematical operations easily. And so with all this data that we have, we can have access to a large formula bank. And if you were to just click on that button, it will show you what sort of formulas that you can have access to. Some of the common ones that we tend to use constantly, we have our sum, average. We know what those two functions normally do. Sum just basically adds all the numbers together, and it really helps you count number of students, potentially, if they're giving you like a number code. You can count the average, and this is important for us to determine like how the students are performing in a particular assessment. And then the very last two is something that I have used personally. So I count if. So let's just say my students have submitted something on Google Forms and I'm looking at it and I only want to count certain types of data. So like I only count if this data range is larger than the number 5. Then I can see this number of students have answered the questions correctly. So it will very easily spit out a number if you give it a particular criterion, where if it's larger or less than a particular number, or if it is equal to a particular value. And then another thing that I really like using, and this is really related to me as a science teacher, whereas now it's really hard for us to do experiments. So a lot of the times I'm giving students made up data for them to analyze. And rather than just typing out the data, I know where the ballpark is supposed to be. So I would create rand between, and rand between gives you two values. So you give Google Sheet like a boundary for it to say, oh, I want to generate a bunch of numbers between 0 and 100. And then if you type that formula into your cell, again, just drag that cell down, Google Sheets will automatically populate the entire column with numbers between 0 and 100. And so that's really important for me because then I can give every single student a unique data set that is within a tolerable range. So if you really are interested in finding out more, Ini and I are going to be doing a future Google Sheets session, particularly in formulas, as well as designing pivot tables where we can start creating this fantastic spreadsheet that allows you to analyze and organize your data.
I can talk to this one. One of the things that Isabella and I were discussing is we tend to be creators, collectors, organizers of data. And so as educators, just keeping in mind that when we are collecting data, when we are organizing data and making decisions based on some of this data, we need to be aware of our own biases, and we need to be aware of our blind spots. And so some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves while we're looking at these numbers is, what does this data represent? Who is represented in the data, but most importantly, who is not? What does this data say about who counts and who doesn't? And also keeping in mind that a lot of this data is confidential, and we are inundated with multiple kinds of data, whether it be demographic, gender-based, well-being data, obviously assessment and evaluation data, but noting that this is actually more than just numbers. They're reflective of lived experiences and narratives. So even though they're numbers and we have fun organizing, creating, collecting, analyzing, it is it's deep rooted in a lot of our biases, and we need to be able to check ourselves and be mindful and aware of the messages that are perpetuated and how we can disrupt that and then use the data to inform our actions as we move forward as educators.
That is so, so important. Thank you for bringing that to our attention and to the forefront, because we sometimes forget, don't we? It seems like just a spreadsheet. I want to thank you so much. I've learned a ton from you ladies, my goodness. We do have a feedback form, so whether you are in watching in person or if you're online, we would definitely appreciate if you fill out the feedback form so that we have a better sense of what worked, what didn't work, and what we can do in future for webinars. I also invite you to join us next time, February 10th, when we have 2 more of our leaders who will be sharing in hyperdocs. And hyperdocs have been my savior in this hybrid remote learning crazy world that we've been in. So I'm really excited to see what they have to share. This presentation, as well as all of our past resources, are available on our website, which is the GEG Ontario site. I thank you so much, ladies, and I thank you to everyone watching for your participation, for your comments. Have a wonderful night.